Let us read the main passage for today. It's a little bit longer, Matthew 25, verses 34 through 40. So I will read a verse, and then you guys read a verse, and at the very end, verse 40, we will read together. Then the king will say to those on his right, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. I was naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me." "And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you?" And all together. And the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me." Amen. This is the word of the Lord. All right, it is a new year. It's the first Sunday of the new year. And how has this new year been for you guys so far? Several of us, I think maybe half or a little more than half of us, have spent this new year, going into the new year, reading the entire New Testament. Guys, you did it. You can now tell people, "I've read all of the New Testament in 3 days." Right? So it's very special. And I'm really, really proud of everyone who participated in this and did it together. And you guys were tired, you guys were drowsing here and there. Like, I think it was like a ripple effect. Like, everyone wouldn't sleep all at the same time. But like one person would be like drowsing here, and then when that person wakes up, someone else would be sleeping over here. But you guys still, like, even you guys stayed up late to finish reading if you didn't finish by the time. So I'm really proud of you guys, and really, I think it's awesome that we finished this. And we did it at the start of the new year, and that's very meaningful. So I hope your desire to read the Bible is still with you and you're not exhausted, and that you'll continue to read the Bible this year, and then now you can move on to the Old Testament. So there's a lot of books waiting for you in the Old Testament, so I'm sure you'll read that. But today's sermon is titled "Breaking Bread versus Baking Bread." I tried to be creative. I don't know how creative that is, but I tried for this title today. And we'll be looking at what breaking bread means in the Bible. So there are over 100 verses in the Bible about eating together and about food. And the word for food in Hebrew is lahem, which actually means bread. And for the Israelites, food was so synonymous with bread that they used the same word for both meanings. And it was so important because this bread was their staple food. It is what they ate every single day at every single meal. And if you were poor, that's all you ate. Now, in the same way in Korean, the word for food that we commonly use in general is also pap, which is also synonymous with rice. So in Korea, rice is that staple food, as it is for the Israelites that bread was their staple food. Bread for Israelites was a necessity. It was not just something they enjoyed eating, but it was what they had to eat. And it's also not an easy thing to make in ancient times. I was in Israel in the summer of 2015, and it was my second time I was going back to Israel on an excavation. And this time when I was there, while we were digging, we found an ancient bread oven, and they call that a tanur or a tubun. And we found that amongst our findings, and we were really excited to find something that was bigger than just pottery shards. And we got excited and we thought, what if we recreated this bread oven? So what we did in our pastime, in our free time, I know we were very nerdy, and what we did was we decided to recreate this oven, and we made our own version of this ancient oven as a fun experiment. So if you could show some of the pictures. It's just clay. It's just dirt. We wet a lot of dirt together, and we stacked it up in this little opening like this. Can you guys see? Do I need to turn the lights off, or is it good? Okay. So we made this, and then we fired it, the next picture, like this. And you have to fire it so that when it rains, it doesn't, just crumble down. So once you fire it once, it'll stay there, rain or shine. It'll be there. It's like making pottery. So that's the oven. You do that once, and then we made bread. And that bread was very simple. It was flour, It's water and a little bit of sugar. And that was all it was. And we put it on. If you go to the next picture, it's actually a bit of an ordeal. And some people had fun, and I burned my hand while trying to do this. But what you have to do is you wait for the fire to die down. So every time you want to make bread, you have to make fire first. And you have to wait hours until the fire is dead and it's just the ashes that are left. And then you take that bread that you made and you slap it on the inside of the oven. Some people put it on the outside, but it doesn't get that hot. So the inside, if you put it on the inside, the bread is done in like minutes. But you slap it on in the inside and you wait a couple minutes. And if you go to the next picture, you make bread. So this is how you make bread in ancient times. It's very fun. However, it tasted awful. If you look in the picture, it looks amazing. It's golden, it has that yellow color. But if you go to the next picture, that is what is on the other side of the bread, because the oven is not very hygienic at all. It has all of the ashes of the fire next to it. If you were at the retreat, we did our campfire, we did our s'mores in the fire, except it wasn't a natural fire and we had the fire starter in it. So when we roasted our marshmallows, the outside was black, right? So in the same kind of manner, you are eating ashes and little pebbles and little sand pieces along with your bread. And so if you look at, this is just a quick fun fact, if you look at the teeth of ancient people, it's very blunt because they ate so many pebbles. And their teeth are much less sharp than ours today. But that's just an interesting fun fact. Okay, you can put the pictures away. But regardless of the taste, we see here, right? Regardless of what it tasted like or whatever it was, this was the food that they made all day. Women would have slaved away in the kitchens, and they would have spent hours upon hours upon hours making this bread, and then cooking this bread, and then giving the bread during the meals to other people. And like what happened to me, they probably burned their hands in the process. But it's not about the taste, it's about how they would have given these pieces of bread to people when people came into their homes. And this is what we're talking about today, the breaking of the bread, the partaking of a meal together with other people. Now, in these olden times, in these ancient times, people invited strangers into their house. It was custom. It was something you just did. We cannot think about that today, right? In this time and age, when there is so much bad things that are happening in this world, we do not invite strangers into our house, right? That's like 101, what you teach your kids. Do not let strangers into your house. But back then, that was something they did. And it was harder to make a meal than it is today. You know, today when we cook rice, we put it in the rice cooker. We just wash the rice once, we put it in the rice cooker, we wait for 20 minutes, we don't even have to do anything. The rice cooker does everything for us, right? That's how easy it is to make a meal now. But back then, we saw it's very difficult. And it was an interesting thing happened that we struggled during the past week at our retreat. We forgot to bring our rice cooker to the retreat, and we ate a lot of rice. So what we ended up doing was we did it the old way, and maybe the American way, because not a lot of other Americans have rice cookers, right? But we just cooked it on the stove. And it took 2 hours to cook fully when we could have done it in 20 minutes. But for some reason, taking 2 hours and waiting that long to eat that rice, didn't it taste better? For me, it tasted better. Maybe not for you guys, but waiting for that and the amount of time it took, it tasted better. And more labor went into it, more work went into it, and I could feel that in the taste. And I believe it's the same with food in ancient times. Because it took more effort and it took more time to make, that little bit of bread that is offered to the guest in one's home means that much more. It's not just simply someone knocking at your door and saying, hey, I'm really hungry. Do you have anything to eat? And just grabbing a loaf of bread that you bought at the store and giving it to them. It's bread that you're giving them after a full days of work. You worked to make that bread, but you're sharing it with a stranger, with someone you don't know at all. You know, there are still traditions today where a guest comes into your home and you give them bread and salt as a greeting. And Jewish customs still do this today. Even some European customs do it. And this was not only an Israelite culture. cultural tradition. You know, if you look back in ancient Greek culture, it was called xenia, or guest friendship, where you were kind of obligated to have people enter into your home, to clothe them, to shelter them, and to give them food. But for the Greeks, it was a two-way street. If you were gifted, you were obligated then, if that host ever came to your home, to host them. Or if that host never came to your home, to also, likewise, from what you received, if another stranger comes to your home later in life, you would be obligated to help that person as well. This is how intimate breaking bread with someone can be. You know, in Acts and the times of the apostles, they did this regularly. It was what they did. Whenever they had meetings, when it said they worshiped, it was basically them eating with each other and then talking amongst each other. It was not a service like this where a pastor is standing here and preaching to you and then you listen. It was a time of mingling, breaking bread, and talking about the gospel amongst each other. You know, it's in these actions that Jesus partakes in during the Passover at the Last Supper, when he breaks the bread in two, that we see him passing out to his disciples. This is the breaking of the bread that I'm talking about, the communal meal that they're having, the time that they're spending together. And it's active, it's communal, it's together, not individual. It's not a meal that you get, you know, in those restaurants in Japan where they have those little dividers amongst yourselves so that each individual person does not even have to look at anyone. You don't even have to look at the cook because there's a divider in front of you as well. So nobody can see you eat and you're eating alone, right? That's not what the Bible is talking about when we talk about meals, right? It's that you're conversing with each other. Another thing that happens, you know, in our modern age is, you know, we have our smartphones, right? And even when we go out to eat with our friends, you know, everyone, if you look around at the table, everyone will have their heads down with their smartphones, and they'll just be eating with their smartphones in their hands. So that's our modern age and time. But we're going back to the biblical times and seeing what it truly means to break bread. Because back then, it had a more significant meaning. And the Bible is clear on the importance of this breaking bread and fellowshipping with one another. In the Old Testament, we see Abraham extending guest rights to these three strangers when they come upon his home. This is what it says in Genesis 18:1-8. And the Lord appeared to him, to Abraham, by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men were standing in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, "O Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree, while I bring a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. And after that, you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So, if you see here, Abraham extends the bread, but then he goes above and beyond. It says later that Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to a young man who prepared it quickly. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared and set it before them. And he stood by them under the tree while they ate. So Abraham not only gives them bread, which is kind of his cultural obligation, but then goes and kills a calf and gives meat to these strangers as well. Abraham doesn't know these 3 men. He has no idea who they are, yet he treats them as if they are family. Abraham is already practicing the words of our main passage today, that if you feed the hungry and the thirsty and welcome the stranger, you are welcoming Jesus in. But perhaps, we might think that Abraham's doing it due to his customs, due to the, time that he's living in. That was what everyone did, right? So I don't think Abraham's special. You might think that. But when we get to Jesus' time, we see that the custom has continued on, except it has changed a little. We see that there has become a distinction of who to invite into your home and who not to invite. When it used to be unconditional, it has become conditional. This invitation is now no longer for everyone. We see this when Jesus is seen eating with sinners and tax collectors, and the Pharisees are appalled with him. They are shocked. In Mark 2:16, this is what it says. When the teachers of the law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the sinners and tax collectors, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with tax collectors and sinners?" You see, eating together had become a symbol of sorts. Eating together had become a status. It had become so important in this culture that depending on who you ate with, you would gain favor if that person was liked. And you would lose favor if that person was someone who was shunned in that community. And so it became a status play of sorts, like being able to say, "Oh, I had so-and-so in my home." Like that was why people invited people into their homes. Thus, Jesus, who chose to eat and associate himself with tax collectors, who were, at that time, tax collectors were not just simply people who delegated your taxes to the government, but these were the people who were swindlers, who were basically the mobsters during that time, who would extort enormous sums of money from the people and then keep a lot of it for themselves. So this action of eating with tax collectors, with sinners, put Jesus' reputation at risk. And so to the Pharisees, it made absolutely no sense. Yet Jesus gives us an answer. In verse 17, this is what he says. On hearing this, Jesus said to them, "It is not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners." You see, the very act of inviting a stranger to eat in your home is not because the stranger is noble or worthy of entering your home or a high person, but rather for the opposite reason. You are the host. And what this means is that you have the provisions to provide and to help a stranger, someone who is in need. And it's thus your duty to clothe, to feed, to shelter this person that is in need. And this is the gospel that Jesus preaches to us. One that is about reaching out, not to the holy, not to people who already know, but to the unholy, to the helpless, and to the sinners. And I told you before that it was a reciprocal relationship for xenia, for Greek hospitality. Yet in biblical guest friendship, we see that that's not always the case. Abraham never meets these strangers again, yet he still gives to them, expecting nothing in return. And our main passage today is one of these moments that Jesus points out, where when we act towards strangers without expecting anything in return, we will see that we're clothing not just that man that we have in front of us, but also Jesus. In essence, he's showing us that our actions here on this earth, when we are helping people in need, when we're there for people who need us, it may not be rewarded right away, right in front of us. But he's promising us, Jesus is promising us that rather in heaven, we will receive that reward. We tend to give gifts, and we do things for people expecting things in return. And it's only natural to expect that. And we do that in our friendships. Yet Jesus is telling us today not to do that. To freely give, to freely help, and not to be doing this just to receive something in return. And that if we do this with that kind of heart, with that humble heart, he will not look up the other way, but he will reward us in heaven for our efforts. Later in Acts, we see how even the Christians fail at times to understand the importance of unconditional welcome at the table. Apostle Paul, later in Galatians, gets angry at Apostle Peter. And Apostle Peter, as we know, is a man of great faith. And he's, the rock, the foundation of the church, right? But even he makes a mistake. Because here, what happens is this, that Apostle Peter, he eats with some Gentiles. And Gentiles are, not Jews. So in the past, Jews would never eat with the Gentiles. It was considered unholy. It was considered something that God did not approve of. But, now is the time and place where Gentiles are receiving the word. And so Apostle Peter eats with these Gentiles, and he welcomes them, and he's spending time with them. But then later, some friends of James come, and that's what the Bible says, friends of James. I'm assuming that these people who come are Jews who do not accept Gentiles at their table. And so these people now come to the area that Peter was at, and what Peter does is appalling. What he does is he stops eating with the Gentiles. And what happens is that not only Peter stops eating with the Gentiles, but Barnabas also stops eating with the Gentiles. And now Barnabas is a completely another story, because Barnabas is someone who walked with Apostle Paul, and he was the front runner for preaching to Gentiles. Basically, his entire ministry was preaching to Gentiles. And this man starts to not eat with the Gentiles. And so Apostle Paul is so angry with this situation, because these two people, these two leaders of the church, have lost sight of this unconditional welcome at the table. They have lost sight of what is important. It's not the laws, it's not the rules that the Jewish customs are giving, but it's this unconditional welcome, this love and acceptance in Christ that was more important. And he urges them to see that the sins of the Gentiles are not any different from the sins of the Jews. So this is my first message to you today, the first part, that you should embrace your neighbor, help your neighbor, stop trying to receive something from them in return, and just help them. Because it's what God has commanded us to do. And to unconditionally welcome people to the table. I want us today to reconsider ourselves and to look back at our lives. If there was ever moments where we judged people around us for not keeping God's commandments, for not being as holy as we think we are, and for judging people for not coming out to service or for living a double life outside the church. Yes, they're living in sin, but who are you to say anything to them, right? What we're called to do tells us here today is to accept them, to welcome them at our table, and to receive them, and to talk with them, to preach the gospel to them, not to shun them and say, you can't join us at our table because of their faults. If we approach these friends and our family members with disdain, there's nothing we can do for them. And if we approach them with disdain and then try to preach the gospel to them, there is no way that they're going to hear the gospel. In fact, they're going to be put off the gospel even more because of your actions, right? Yet, if we, like Jesus, embrace them at our table, like Paul, accept them, and then show them God's love through that meal, there is something that can change in their lives. When we show that love to them, not worrying about our reputation being tainted, it will then lead them to Christ and to their salvation. That's the way to go. When we're evangelizing, that's the method that we should take, and not disdain or condemnation or telling them, sometimes it works when you say, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe in God. That scare tactic works sometimes, but usually it doesn't, right? It does not. It's that love that you need to show first. Take a look at the story of Zacchaeus. We see it in the Bible. He is one of the most horrible tax collectors. Nobody likes him. He has no friends, and he has a miserable life. And people pointed their finger at him and hated him, and thus no one invited him to their table. Yet, who comes along? Jesus comes along, and there's a huge crowd of people in front of Jesus. And Zacchaeus, even though he wants to hear the word, he cannot get in front of him, so he climbs a tree. And Jesus sees Zacchaeus on that tree, and he says, Zacchaeus, invite me to your home. And what happens? When Jesus invites Zacchaeus to that meal, to that table, sorry, I can't snap, but pretend I snap. There is an immediate change in this sinner, in Zacchaeus. Immediately, he invites Jesus and the disciples and everyone there that he can fit inside his home, and he feeds them. And then he gives back all the money that he swindled. And then he gives back even more to the poor, to the widowed, to everyone he can touch. And then he tells Jesus, I desire to follow you. This happens in one meal. Just one meal. And that's all it takes. Just one person inviting a sinner, someone shunned by the community, to the table, to a space with you. In the same way, beloved, we need to unconditionally love the people around us. And if we want them to change, this is the only way. And I believe our church is not too bad at doing this hospitality part and caring for new members. When a new member comes to New York, there's always someone who will take them on a tour to Manhattan. Like, Always. Someone will do that. And someone will take them to go eat in the good places that are fun to eat at, and they will spend time with them. You guys always hang out after Sundays and spend time with each other. And I really commend you for doing this, because it's how we can show love to our community. And you guys also go out to evangelize every Friday, right? And while doing so, I'm sure you've seen how many people are suffering in this world and how many people are hopeless in the lives that they live. What I want to show you is that evangelizing is not only about going out to the streets. Yes, we need to do that. But it's also about inviting people into our homes, into our spaces, right? Where we're selfish. So we want that space to just be us and our close friends and people we're comfortable with. But evangelizing is about bringing people in even to that personal space and feeding them and spending time with them. It is so much easier to tell a man on the streets who, has not showered for days and smells and is not clean, to just tell them, Jesus loves you, and then walk along on your way. It's so easy to do that. It is so much harder to say to that man, come into my home, take a seat at my table. Here, take these clothes off the back. But it's the second, it's this that Jesus commands for us to do. And it's this that Jesus does himself and asks us to do as well. Thus, we finally get to the title of today's sermon, Breaking Bread and Baking Bread. Anyone can bake bread. It makes you feel good. You have a purpose, there's a goal. You can bake the bread because you are helping someone. Yet, breaking bread means you have to engage with the person you are helping. You are no longer in a higher position looking down, but are putting yourself in equal status with these people. You are lowering yourself actually to their status to break bread with them. Yet, this humble serving is only half of the message today. Beloved members, I want to tell you today of how important it is to show this hospitality of opening up your home, not only to strangers on this earth, but this is the second part, but also to open the door to Jesus. For opening the door to strangers is opening the door to Jesus. That's our main message today, right? So if we focus now, I want you to focus now to turn your gaze on having Jesus come into our hearts. There are several things that we need to do first before he can come in. And this is what we need to do. First, repeat after me. I need to clean my house. Sorry, let me take a drink of water. So, I'm not the most organized person in this world. My style of cleaning is weekly cleaning at the end of the week. I will live in a mess until the end of the week where I deep clean everything then. And then it takes but a day to get everything messy again. So that's me. I'm sharing this with you. I'm not proud of it, but I am sharing this with you. But this type of lifestyle, although it's comfortable to me personally, if I want to have spontaneous guests over, it does not work very well at all. If I have dinner pre-planned, it's easier because then I can clean for hours the day before and get ready. However, if I want to have people over just on the spot, I can't. And I've unfortunately had to say no to many meetups and meals that happened on the fly because of this very fact, because my house was still too dirty to invite anyone in. And I regretted it at that moment so much. I should have cleaned earlier. I should have kept a clean house. But this habit is so hard to fix. What I'm trying to tell you is this. The same is true for entering your spiritual home as well. If you're not prepared ahead of time, if you're not ready and constantly keeping your home clean, there will be moments when Jesus is waiting at the door and cannot enter because your home is dirty. All the moments that you say, oh, I can clean up later. I have time. Or when you say, oh, it's just a couple of dishes. Oh, it's just a couple of dishes. I'll clean it up later. All of those moments have accumulated inside of you, and those dishes stack up, right? And you get to a point where you cannot open your door to Jesus because of the mess inside. Are you going to leave Jesus at the door then and say, can you wait just a couple minutes? I'll be right back. And then go inside and, put all the trash inside a cabinet or, if you have a pile of clothes, put that under your bed. Are you going to do that when Jesus is at the door? No, because it will be too late. If you were aware Jesus was coming, you would have started cleaning with Clorox months ago. And like every day, and every single surface would be clean. There would be no speck of dust in your eyes that would be visible if you knew that Jesus was coming. Beloved, we never know when Jesus is coming. We do not know when he will be at the door and when he will be waiting. And I pray that we will always keep our hearts clean to allow him entrance any day, at any time, no matter when, that we'll always be ready with that clean home. Second, how we can be ready for Jesus is repeat after me. I need to prepare the food ahead of time. So when you are hosting someone at your house, you're not only going to show them a clean home, right? You're also going to prepare a meal for them to eat. Okay, so it's not only cleaning, but if you do not have food prepared ahead of time, you will be too late when the guest is there. You'll have to serve whatever you have at home, whether that's some crackers or cereal that you have in your cupboard or just water. You'll have to serve what's available. What I mean by this is not only do we need to purify our hearts, but whatever gifts, whatever talents God has called us on this earth for must be ready when he comes. We have all been given talents. We have all been given gifts and things that we are good at. Maybe we are not good at everything, but there is one thing that we are good at. If you do not know what you are good at, please come and talk to me, and I will tell you what you are good at, because everyone is good at something, okay? We all have been given this, but God calls us to use them and to practice them for his kingdom. If we're lazy and we don't prepare ahead of time, God cannot use us for his work. When he knocks on our door and he calls us and says, Faith, I'm here and I want you to do so and so, if we don't have that prepared and practiced, we cannot do it. I am not going to read the entire story, but think about the parable of the 3 servants. The master gives these 3 servants different things. One servant, he gives 5 bags of silver, the other 2 bags of silver, and the last 1 bag of silver. And what happens when the master comes back? What happens is that the guy who had 5 bags of silver made it into 10 bags. And the guy who had 2 bags of silver made it into 4. But the last guy, the last servant, he did nothing with the 1 bag of silver. And so when the master came back, there was but 1 bag of silver. And you might think, hey, at least he didn't lose any of the money, right? But to God, to the master, what does he call him? He says, you wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I could have gotten some interest on it. So many people lament and think that they were never given any gifts. And they look at the person who has 5 gifts and they go, why did God not give me 5 gifts? And they lament and they complain about that. But what I want to tell you today is that God has given each and every one of you a gift. Whether it is 5, whether it is 2, whether it is 1, he has given you a gift and he has entrusted you to do something with it. To not complain, but to do something with it. And this parable shows us that if we do not prepare this talent ahead of time and multiply it, God will not see what we have done for his kingdom. And we will be like this wicked and lazy servant. And what we even have, even that 1 gift, will be taken from you and given to the one who has done more. How does this link to preparation of food? It's very simple. It's that food that we prepare is what then the strangers eat, right? It's what then these people are filled with. When we are in the host, right? When we're hosting other people, we are there to fill them up, right? If you do not have your gifts ready to fill other people up with, you are doing nothing for them. You're inviting them into an empty home that does not help them and actually gives them worse things, right? You're not giving them anything. It's why we need to be prepared and ready for this. So, moving on. Third, the way we can truly open our doors to Jesus and become this good host is, repeat after me, I need to spend time with my guest. We're flying through a lot of these New Testament stories today, and it's because I read the entire New Testament with you guys this past week, so it's fresh in my memory. So I'm like using all of these examples. But when we look at the story of Martha and Mary, you guys remember them, right? When they invite Jesus into their home, we see the importance of the host spending time with the guest. While Martha prepared food, and we know now this preparation of food, should it have happened when Jesus came? It should have happened before Jesus was there. So that's another story that I'll talk about at another time, but it is something that Martha does wrong. But anyway, while Martha prepared the food, Mary lays at Jesus' feet and listens to his teachings. What does this show? It shows that preparation needs to be done before Christ comes. And when he is here, when he's in your home, you need to stop focusing on the works, on the actions, on the things you need to do, and focus on his words. It's dangerous if we continue to prepare and not focus on the fellowship with God. So many times we're preoccupied with our leadership in the church. If you're on praise team, with that. If you're leading small groups, with that. If you're taking pictures, with that. Whatever we are serving in the church, whatever we're doing for God, it's so easy to lose sight of what's more important. And what's more important is that quality time with God. I've been to a lot of home parties, and a lot of them have been Korean home parties. And a funny thing happens. What ends up happening is, the host opens the door, and then you go and you sit in the living room, and then, you go to the host and you go, oh, is there anything I can help you with? And then the host goes, no, go sit on the couch. And then you sit on the couch, and you're like waiting and waiting and waiting, and the host continues to do something. They're very busy. They're either making food or preparing things or cleaning something, and you continue to sit there on the couch and you just wait, and you go back to the host and go, no, really, can I help you with anything? And they go sit, and they tell you to go back. And this happens for like over 30 minutes where you're sitting on the couch by yourself and another guest comes, and it's so awkward if you don't know that person, and you both are sitting on the couch like, so, how do you know so-and-so? And it's so awkward, right? And you cannot wait until the host comes and finally sits down with you. But what sometimes happens is, I have been to a party before where the host never sits down. Like, there is never a moment that the host is sitting. And to talk to the host, you have to go and help them. And you have to be with them. And in that short moment is when you spend time with them. And I've gone home before where I felt, well, I spent time with the host's other friends, but not the host, right? Can you imagine waving Jesus off when he comes to get you and he says, come eat and spend time with me now? And you say, oh, no, Jesus, I'm busy. Can you just sit on the couch for a little bit? I'll be there in just a second. Can you imagine doing that to Jesus? But it's what we do all the time, And it's why you need to prepare ahead of time so that when your guest does come, you can solely focus on the guest. Because the guest is not there for your food. Let's be real, right? Only like 10% of the population is really good at cooking. Right? The other 90%, your food is mediocre. Your guests are not coming for your food. They are coming to spend time with you. They're coming because they want to talk to you, right? And if you're not there spending time with them, you're missing the point. You're not giving them what they want. And it's that when you do spend time with your guest, there is also wisdom waiting for you. When Abraham feeds the 3 strangers, after they're full, and Abraham is there in the tent with them, guess what he hears? He hears a prophecy about finally having a son. It's an amazing thing to hear when he was not expecting anything from them. What else do we see? Whenever Jesus eats with people, there's always a word of wisdom that he announces. When he breaks bread at the Last Supper, he gives amazing verses for the disciples to learn from. Whenever he breaks bread with other people too, he shares the stories of the parables, right? He gives this wisdom in the moment of breaking bread. Apostle Paul, when he eats with the Gentiles too, he shows them how much he understands them. The Bible doesn't say what he talks about while he's breaking bread with them, but I'm sure it's also words of wisdom. When you take this time to spend time with your guests, with the people you invite into your home, regardless of whether they're wise or whether they're your pastor or someone who's in an above situation from you, it doesn't have to always be that case. Whoever you invite, when you hear their story, when you listen to their testimony, when you hear where they are coming from, there is wisdom that you earn through that encounter. And beloved, I hope you all aspire to receive that wisdom when you invite people into your homes. It's in that communal fellowship that God gives the host with this wisdom. And this receiving is as equally important as the giving, because if we're not filled up, then we will have an end to what we can pour out. And this is the important part for, I think, all of the church members here, because you guys have been in church for long, and more so than being on the guest, on the receiving end, you are definitely a host, right? You are definitely someone who will serve others. And so this last message is what is most important to you all. And it's that if you are not filled up in this process while you are giving and ministering to others, you will end up burning out, because we must constantly be filled, or there will come a time where you will feel drained from all your works, from everything you're serving, and from all that you give, because you cannot keep giving if there is nothing inside of you to give, right? That's just physically impossible. Like, you have to look at the numbers. You can't give if you have zero inside of you. You need to be filled, and we need to take that time to be filled. Some people think it's selfish. They think, to take that time, to pray to God for an hour, I could take that time and spend it with someone who needs to hear the gospel. That's how some people work. That's how some people think. However, I'm telling you today to not do that. You got to be selfish at some point. I'm telling you, don't take that out of context, people who are listening online, but there is that balance. I say that all the time. Pastor Danny says that all the time. Balance is key. Whenever you give, you need to spend equal time receiving. Whenever you receive, then you need to spend equal time giving. You cannot always receive. If you end up always receiving, like, that grace that you receive starts to diminish. There is grace in sharing. And once you share, God doesn't let you stay dry, right? He pours out even more. And he gives twofold, threefold, tenfold more to you, so that then you can gift it to more and more and more people. It's that constant trickle of receiving and then giving. And beloved, this is the pattern of life that I hope you all can live. This is a new year of new beginnings, of new starts, and of new standards. And I want to ask you, what can you do differently in your life this year? How can you clean your home? How can you prepare your hearts? And to help prepare your hearts, I want to encourage you guys to do this with me. We read the entire New Testament together, but I want to encourage you now then to read daily. 5 chapters a day. And I know some of you guys have been doing that. If you are on the evangelizing team, you're required to do this. If you have not been doing it, I don't know what to tell you, but you should have been doing it, right? You're required. If not, in my small group, I've been sending out, but it's been, sometimes I didn't do it and sometimes other people have. It's been hard this past year. We tried, but it was hard to keep up with it. But I want to tell you guys today, starting this new year, let's do this, right? 5 chapters a day. You can do it. You guys read, 10 hours a day, right? For 10 hours, you spent that. You can do 5 chapters. What is that? At max, if you're a super slow reader, is that 30 minutes, right? 30, 40 minutes max is what 5 chapter is. You can totally do that in one day, right? And I'm going to, after the service, if you guys tell me, let me know, and I will create a separate Katok group so that the people who are in our EM who are not doing this will not feel burdened. Because in no way do I want to burden you. And I want you to be doing this out of your own heart and your own wish. So don't feel forced. I encourage you, but don't feel forced. And we're going to create a separate group so that only the people who desire to do it will be kind of pushed to do it. And I will be pushing you in that group. But hopefully, I'll talk it through with Pastor Danny. Hopefully, there will also be a reward at the end, right? Because that's always nice to have something. I know in Korea, it used to be like you would get a prophecy from one of the pastors if you finished whatever the reading plan was. So maybe something like that or something even more. But I'll let you guys know about that later. But this is just one way of preparing your heart, and I just want to help you. So I'm putting that out there for you guys. But there are so many other things that we can do to prepare ourselves. And one of them is definitely praying as well. And we're going to go into a time of praying soon. But as we pray, I want us to ask ourselves, have we cleaned our inner homes or our inner rooms inside of us this year for Jesus to enter in? Have we taken the time to prepare our meal? And most importantly, have we taken the time then to spend time with Jesus and listen to what he has to say? We've gone through so many different meal times and eating together in the Bible, but I want to mention one last one, and it's in Revelations 9, 6 through 10. And it's about this satisfying communion that God and our brothers and sisters in Christ will be in at the great marriage supper of the Lamb, right? It's the final feast. It's the final get-together, the bringing together of people that Revelations mentions. And it's how important eating together is. At the end, right? Revelations is the end of the Bible. It does not say, oh, you'll spend one-on-one time with God, or, oh, you'll be able to get a prophecy from God, or, oh, God will lay hands on you. Like, that's not the final thing that it says. It says there is a final feast. There is a final get-together. There is a final breaking of the bread. And I'm telling you guys today how important that communal worship, that communal moment of eating together, of spending time together here amongst you guys, but also with God, and also with the people in our hearts that do not know God yet, right? It's the three. All three are different types of communal meals. We need to have that step of inviting God into our lives. Otherwise, the things you've prepared, everything that I've talked about, all of that means nothing. All the meals that you prepared will be a waste. And I don't want all of your hard work to go to waste. I want everything to count. For Christ and for your neighbors and for strangers, when you prepare these things with God's love and with God's heart, you too will be filled with God's love. And I want us to end reading our main message again, because this is the commandment that Jesus gives us, and it's the one thing that we need to do amongst each other, and as if we are doing it to Jesus himself. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, and you visited me. I was in prison, and you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him, saying, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? And when did we see you a stranger and welcome you, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and visit you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, as you did it to one of the least of these my brothers, you did it to me. So let us pray now at this time. If you can turn on the music as well. I want us to take this time. We won't pray for too long, but I want us to check ourselves of the state of our hearts, of the state of our inner rooms, of how clean it is, of how prepared we are for Christ. So let's take this time now to cry out to him.